Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guests today are David Mader, the Controller at the Office of Management and Budget. Beth Angerman is Executive Director of Unified Shared Services Management at the General Services Administration. Bill Byer is a Principal at Deloitte Consulting. Thomas Muir is Director of Support Services at the Veterans Affairs Department. And Chip Fulgham, the Chief Financial Officer and Deputy Secretary for Management at the Homeland Security Department. And this idea of shared services is really nothing new this month, this year, this decade. There has been a shared services initiative really dating back to the early days of the George W. Bush administration, which was picked up, modernized, and some of the terminology changed under the Obama administration, and here we are. And so I'd like to get an assessment maybe on how things stand now in agency adoption of shared services, and I'm going to start with Dave Mader.
Thanks, Tom. And I think that what we've been able to do in this administration as part of the President's management agenda is put more emphasis on shared services. If you take a look at the President's management agenda, there are a couple of these cross-agency priority goals. One of them is administrative shared services, and I agree that this concept's been around. I actually got involved in it back in the early 1990s when I was in government last time. I think the fact that the president has emphasized this as one of the key management initiatives has given us the ability to move forward very rapidly over the last 2.5 years.
And Beth, to a great degree, the GSA has almost been deputized as the carrier out on the technical and services side of many of these initiatives. So how does it look from your perspective? How much take-up has there been?
So I think the new organization in GSA around the Unified Shared Service Management team that I'm leading, I think is a really important step to establishing shared services as an enterprise-wide, government-wide initiative and starting to look at all of these really important mission support functions across government and across the initiatives themselves, and understanding that financial management and HR and grants and IT and acquisitions all are part of the the management functions that these agencies are really focusing on finding more efficient ways to deliver. And I think GSA is positioned really well because of its role in an IT leadership and in acquisition leadership and in real property to help steer the government in the right direction.
All right, just to put you on the spot a little bit, suppose the entire shared services opportunity was 100. Where on the scale between 0 and 100 would you say government agencies are at this point, federal agencies?
I think it depends on the discipline, right? I think we're further along when we talk about HR and systems. We still have a ways to go when we talk about financial management systems. And I think when we talk about services, there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think the great benefit of USSM now is that we can start to have a strategy that crosses over those disciplines so we can start to move the government forward in a consistent way.
Okay, so didn't give me a number, but it varies, you would say.
It varies. Yeah,
okay.
Actually, I think the number is closer to if we're just talking about adoption of systems. We're in the 75% range on the HR, the core HR systems. And for those using an approved shared service provider for financial management, more in the 30% range.
All right, so there's a lot of opportunities
Yes.
left in really all areas of shared services.
Absolutely.
All right, and Bill, you have been something of a skeptic on this, in favor of it, but you want things to move faster. What's your perspective from the vendor standpoint?
I think in terms of the Beltway and the vendors of the private sector, there's a lot of opportunity, but as well, there's a lot of risk. The big opportunity, obviously, is what Beth said. The boiling the ocean of going after things like acquisition, cyber, grants, FM, HR, huge opportunities. However, it's a lot, and it's almost too much, I believe, without private sector help. Now, the other side of that is private sector doesn't necessarily have the resources either. So the government doesn't really have the resources, and private sector can't step up to the challenge as aggressively as they could. So I think that we have an opportunity. However, we have huge challenges to move this thing forward, and we need more legislative mandates to do more consolidation. There's an opportunity to really bolster your public sector providers, and in conjunction with the private sector. I don't believe that the private sector is able to take on everything as an outsourcing opportunity. Absolutely not. They're not ready for that either. But this is a huge lift for the government right now.
All right, so we will get in more of that on legislation and the possibility of what industry could provide. Chip, at Homeland Security, of course, you're like a market in itself. I mean, Homeland Security, 166,000 employees, 22, or I lost count of the component agencies. And really the effort has been to try to unify within that department all these years. So how would you say you're doing as a department? And is there anything at DHS that is a shared service with another department?
So a couple of things. We are using shared services in our HR, community payroll, and some other things. So we're pretty far along there. As far as financial management goes, we are in a partnership with DOI to stand up 3 of our components. The first component's up and running. It's been a challenge. It's not easy, as Bill said. But we do have them up and running. We'll get the next one up and running in the next year. And then we'll get the United States Coast Guard up and running. And then we're also looking at our next set of components to go. So when Beth said we're about at 30%, I think she's talking about us a little bit because that's about where we are.
And the unity of effort that has characterized Homeland Security, accelerated under Jay Johnson, has that had a shared services piece or flavor to it?
So absolutely, in terms of financial management, in terms of acquisition, in terms of all of our what we call C-suite lines of business, where we're looking to make sure that we have an integrated approach and making sure that we break down stovepipes within various functional organizations. Absolutely, his leadership's been critical.
All right, and Tom, at Veterans Affairs is a little almost at the opposite end of the spectrum. There's 3 major components, if you will, to it. And one of them is really big, and the other is kind of big, and the other's not so big.
Kind of small, right?
Kind of small. So you're like the biggest department with the fewest pieces, in some sense, across the federal government. So how does shared services within VA work, and what are you doing, say, at this point, cross-department?
Thanks, Tom. VA has been a consumer of shared services in the marketplace for quite some years. So we partner with federal shared service providers to provide us payroll, for example.
Also Interior?
For us, it's Department of Defense and DFAS,
right.
the Defense Finance and Accounting System. We're looking to move our financial management system to a federal shared service provider community, and we're a consumer of HR in the shared service marketplace. But as part of about 2 years ago, when Secretary Bob McDonald joined the team, we took a look across the enterprise of things we could do better to put the focus on the mission of serving veterans better. We come up with this dialogue, this discussion of the MyVA transformation effort to make VA MyVA, a VA that veterans, taxpayers can be proud of again. So as part of re-earning trust of veterans and their families and survivors, we have kind of broken those initiatives into 5 major initiatives. Veterans experience, to improve the veterans experience so it's the same experience at every VA facility. To improve the employee experience, every great customer service agency is always one of the best places to work. Shared services, to improve shared services and to optimize kind of our business processes around serving veterans by consolidating some of that work in the shared service model. Continuous performance improvement, and finally, new strategic partnerships. So shared services is one of our foundation initiatives as part of our transformation effort that's been ongoing now for a couple of years.
And when you look across all of the medical centers, the centerpiece of VA, do they tend to use the same centralized services for payroll and so forth?
No, and that's just part of the problem, right? Most of our facility directors have the same kinds of issues of the things that are pain points to them serving veterans. And it's always the same 4, right? IT, HR, contracting, and finance. And so what we're looking to do is to redefine that work, to consolidate some of that organizational structure and the people doing that work, then to resource those new organizational structures in a shared service model so we can consolidate that work. Because right now it's done independently. And certainly that's not good business and it's not good government.
Because I imagine, ahead of a large component like that, say a medical center or a big component within DHS, would at some level love to get rid of those services because they could concentrate on what the agency is supposed to be doing and not have to worry about IT modernizing and HR.
Exactly. I mean, the value proposition for a facility director is huge, right? The opportunities are gigantic, and we've got the right momentum now with the government effort. As Dave mentioned earlier about the President's management agenda and the new office that Beth runs, and working with the federal government community to push this forward and really accelerate the timelines for adoption.
All right, and Dave Mader, I heard one OMB official many years ago say that being at OMB is like preaching to a graveyard. There's a lot of people underneath you, but you're not sure they hear what you're saying. And so at your point of view, what does it look like when you preach the shared services? What kind of audience feedback, if you will, comes back to the White House?
So I hadn't heard that, although the other day somebody said, I described it as herding cats, and they said, no, Dave, you can't herd cats, you can only move their food. But I think what we've managed
Spoken
to do,
like a true controller.
I think what we've managed to do is to actually create a bit of excitement around the possibility of doing business differently. And I think both Tom and Chip have talked about the challenges that they face within their respective departments. And I think a realization that, if you can find somebody who can provide HR, finance, IT for you, that allows you and your team to really focus on the core mission. And I think that's what shared service allows us to do, is to provide an opportunity for people to provide, service to, whether it's veterans or taxpayers or, in the case of DHS, to the homeland, and really not worry about, am I going to get paid? Are my vendor payments going to be made timely? Am I going to hire the right people at the right time? So I think shared service is a real enabler of the core missions of the departments.
All right, and Bill, looking at the private sector for a moment, do you find that there are good models for shared services adoption in, say, large corporations that also have lots of fiefdoms and that are separate profit centers and so forth, and really not that much unlike a big department?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of parallels to the federal government. Obviously, the federal government on a scale has the largest shared services opportunity. I mean, if you just look at some of the technologies that have been implemented across the government, it's by scale compared to corporate is absolutely huge. However, great models, HP, Caterpillar, many multinational companies have implemented shared services and have done it across geographies, have implemented triages to figure out how to get the best pricing, have implemented technologies like cloud and some of these other things to make sure that they're utilizing technology to the fullest advantage, and then process reengineering. They also have taken an approach, which some of the agencies have actually started to take an approach, which Tom alluded to, as well as agencies like Commerce taking a multifaceted approach where they look at not only just HR or FM, they actually look at all aspects of shared services and then determine how to really run shared service more like a portfolio. So it's a give and take. I know Beth and Dave have been traveling and having many conversations with the private sector and many people that have implemented that and have actually taken lessons learned both ways.
Yeah, and Beth, that leads to a good question for you, and that is, what do you find as a good governance way of going about this within an agency to make sure that it does happen? I mean, is the CIO the belly button that you push, or is it the chief financial officer, or how does it all work in terms of they all agreeing to get it done?
So some of the best ways we've seen it work so far is when the C-suite comes together and, to I think the point that several panelists have made already, really makes a decision about the strategy for all of these administrative functions moving forward. Chip has set a good model at DHS. We've seen some other good things happening at the Department of Commerce around taking a step back and realizing that to be a good customer, you have to understand exactly what you're looking for, what you're buying, what your expectations are of your provider before you ever start to actually go shopping. Right. And I think that governance and making sure that everyone actually has a seat at the table and an opportunity to weigh in has been critical. But then I also think that the governance we've set up enterprise-wide, right, which is now how do you give the customer community across the government a voice? How do you bring together providers, and how we've set up the new councils in order to actually have those communities start to have a direction and have a weigh in on how the government moves forward in shared services overall.
And you also mentioned shopping, which is trying to choose a provider. How complete at this point is the inventory of shared services available to federal agencies?
I said that the supply right now, which is part of the office, the office that I run, our job is to start to bring together the supply and the demand and understand do we have adequate supply based on what we see as upcoming demand, and doing that in analysis and making sure we're making strategic decisions about what the supply actually is, how it's arranged in government, how it can be optimized so that we have the right delivery methods to satisfy that upcoming demand is important. And we're taking steps to understand that data.
Because we've had, Interior, Business Center, Agriculture,
Yep.
DFAS, and there's a couple of others. But beyond that, what's beyond the horizon at that point?
Yeah, and I think it really is about understanding what's coming. And that's actually a big burden on agencies is we actually need to understand when they have a need, right? When are their systems coming to end of life? When do they have, significant resource limitations to start to actually create or that demand so that we can assess availability on the side of the providers.
All right. And Chip, when you go shopping, so to speak, a terrible word for what the evaluation process really is, but when you go looking at the landscape of possible providers, where do you look, again, past DFAS, Agriculture, Interior, the ones we all know?
Yeah, so to Beth's point, today, the supply, I sort of describe it like going to, there's one store, there are a couple of shirts, there's a black one and a green one, and if you like those shirts, great. If you don't, then wait till we get some more stock in, is sort of where they are today. I also think that when you talk about shared services, there are a couple other things that you need to keep in mind. One is we're talking a lot about the service, but it's the quality of the service. So if the service is high, you won't have to worry about folks coming to the marketplace. They'll be there. And the other is want. So the provider has to want to be a provider. And I think one of the things that they struggle with is that it's not their core mission. It's over here off to the side, and it doesn't oftentimes get the focus and attention it deserves. So I think one of the things Beth is looking at and Dave's looking at is how do we look at the model where this is what they're about and this is what their core is.
All right, good place to stop for a short break. My guests today are Chip Fulgham, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy Secretary for Management at the Homeland Security Department. Beth Angerman is Executive Director of Unified Shared Services Management at the GSA. Dave Mader is Controller at the Office of Management and Budget. Tom Muir is Director of Support Services at Veterans Affairs Department. Bill Byer is a Principal at Deloitte Consulting. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is Progress and Opportunity in Federal Shared Services, sponsored by Deloitte, Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.